One of the most heartbreaking misunderstandings people carry when dealing with narcissists is this: the belief that kindness will change them. That if they can just be gentle enough, patient enough, endlessly compassionate, they will somehow reach the person buried beneath the toxic behaviors. They cling to this idea like a lifeline, believing that kindness is the universal language, one that softens hearts, breaks through walls, and brings light to even the darkest places. It's a beautiful belief, and it works with people who are emotionally healthy. But here's the hard, unfiltered truth. Narcissists do not perceive kindness the way emotionally balanced people do. When you offer kindness to someone who values connection and mutual respect, they receive it as an invitation to trust, to bond, to grow closer. But when you extend that same kindness to a narcissist, someone who values power over partnership, they see it very differently. They interpret kindness not as strength, but as softness, not as love, but as leverage. And that's where the painful misunderstanding begins. You offer them grace, hoping they'll see your heart, hoping they'll finally understand that love is more powerful than fear. But they don't. What they actually see is permission, a green light, proof that you're someone they can manipulate. It's like how a predator hunts not by chasing the strongest prey, but by watching patiently for weakness. A stumble, a pause, a crack in the armor. That's when the attack comes. And narcissists? They move through the world the same way. They don't walk in shouting or demanding. At first, they test quietly, subtly. A sarcastic jab cloaked in humor. A boundary crossed under the guise of a joke. A moment when your voice is dismissed or your feelings are brushed aside. And then they wait. If you brush it off, they take note. If you stay quiet, they store that away. If you respond with understanding and patience, they read that not as virtue but as vulnerability. Each time you make space for their disrespect, they become more confident that you'll continue doing so. And slowly, without even realizing it, you become a participant in your own erosion. You might ask, but isn't it noble to respond to cruelty with compassion? Doesn't that make me better than them? It's a beautiful instinct, but context matters. There is a difference, an enormous one, between kindness and self-betrayal. One uplifts you, the other diminishes you. Narcissists don't play by moral rules. They use them as tools. They know that people like you, empathetic, loyal, well-intentioned, will hesitate to fight back. They rely on your decency to keep them protected from consequences. They know that you'll second-guess yourself, that you'll feel guilty for asserting a boundary, that you'll wonder if standing up for yourself is selfish or unkind. And that is exactly how they maintain control, not through overt dominance, but through quiet psychological erosion. They don't admire your compassion. They exploit it. They don't feel remorse when you forgive them. They feel affirmed. Every time you let them off the hook, hoping your kindness will inspire change, they become more emboldened. Why would they change when their tactics are working? And so the cycle deepens. You try harder. You become more patient. You tell yourself you just need to love them more, understand them more, be even more giving. And they respond not with gratitude, but with greater demands. More entitlement, more manipulation. Not because they don't understand your heart, but because they see it all too clearly, and they use it as a map to control you. So what's the alternative? It's not cruelty. It's not revenge. It's not becoming like them. It's clarity. It's the ability to see what is actually happening without sugarcoating it. It's the strength to say, I will not sacrifice my well-being for someone who does not respect me. It's drawing lines and not apologizing for them. It's realizing that protecting your peace does not make you cold, it makes you conscious. A narcissist will try to make you feel bad for doing that. They'll accuse you of being heartless. They'll flip the script and act like the victim. because their power is entirely dependent on your confusion. If they can make you doubt yourself, they stay in control. But the moment you see through it, the moment you realize that you don't need their approval, their validation, or their permission to set boundaries, that's when the dynamic begins to shift. You don't have to justify your limits. You don't need to explain why you won't tolerate disrespect. You don't owe them endless patience while they dismantle your sense of self. You simply need to stop giving them access to parts of you they do not value. Kindness is sacred, but it only works when it is met with respect. When given to someone who treats it as weakness, it becomes a weapon used against you. So the next time you're tempted to give them another chance, to excuse their behavior, to play the role of the peacemaker, pause and ask yourself, am I being kind because it's truly aligned with my values? Or because I'm afraid of what might happen if I'm not? If fear is driving your response, then it's not kindness, it's submission. And that is exactly what the narcissist is counting on. You don't need to rage. You don't need to plead. You don't need to wait for them to understand what they never intended to. The most powerful response is not fury, it's detachment. When a narcissist realizes they no longer control your emotions, no longer provoke your guilt, no longer manipulate your silence, that is what truly unravels them. Because without control, they lose their sense of power. And perhaps, most painfully, you begin to see the truth of what you've been calling peace. That it was never peace at all. It was your silence, your self-sacrifice, your slow disappearance into someone else's world. But now, you're waking up. You're seeing what kindness without boundaries has cost you. And from that clarity, we begin to ask deeper questions. What really happens when we keep making room for someone who was never willing to make room for us? Let's step into that next truth together. When you stop dancing for their approval, when you finally choose your integrity over their comfort, that's the moment everything begins to shift. As we touched on before, kindness without boundaries becomes submission. And when a narcissist senses their control slipping, that's when their manipulation begins to lose its grip. Because something powerful happens when the person they used to push around suddenly stops moving, stops flinching, stops chasing their approval, stands still, stands tall, and, most importantly, stands alone. The very moment you stop prioritizing their comfort over your self-respect, you begin to reclaim the power they once fed off of. So ask yourself, honestly and without judgment, are you truly preserving peace, or are you unknowingly feeding their control? Are you avoiding conflict for the sake of harmony, or are you abandoning yourself in the process? Because if keeping them happy requires you to keep losing pieces of yourself, what you've built isn't peace. It's a prison, carefully disguised as harmony. One of the most widespread misconceptions about narcissists is the belief that logic, fairness, or emotional openness can reach them. That if you just explain your pain clearly enough, they'll finally understand. That if you present your feelings the right way, they'll suddenly have a revelation, a breakthrough. But this isn't just naive, it's dangerous. Because you're not dealing with someone wired to care about your inner world. You're dealing with someone wired to dominate it. When you're facing a person who operates under a completely different set of values, or perhaps no moral framework at all, then building common ground becomes nearly impossible. You expect that when you express pain, they'll show remorse. That when you point out an injustice, they'll acknowledge it. That when you appeal to their better nature, they'll respond with reflection and humility. But that's not how narcissists work. Their focus isn't on truth, or fairness, or emotional healing. Their focus is singular control. And they maintain it not by bringing clarity, but by creating confusion. They distort facts, shift blame, and twist narratives so thoroughly that you end up trapped not in the problem itself, but in the endless cycle of trying to solve it. That's the secret. The conflict is manufactured. The emotional storm is engineered. and your efforts to make peace only keep you caught in their web. You bring facts, they deny them. You share vulnerability, they deflect it. You seek reconciliation, they turn the issue around and place the blame on you. No matter how rational, calm, or heartfelt you are, the result is always the same. More confusion, more self-doubt, more emotional exhaustion. And that's not by accident, it's by design. Every time you try to reason with them, you feed the illusion that there's still something to resolve, that if you just explain better, they'll finally get it. But they won't, because they never intended to. A narcissist isn't seeking resolution. They're seeking control over your reality. That's why, after every argument or intense conversation, you often walk away feeling disoriented, guilty, or like you're the one who crossed the line. They've recast themselves as the misunderstood hero or the wounded victim, never the perpetrator. And if you dare confront them, they escalate, they gaslight, deflect, or outright lie. You'll hear things like, "You're imagining it. You're being too sensitive. Why are you always attacking me?" All designed to make you question your memory, your emotions, your truth. And here's where most people, with the best of intentions, go tragically wrong. They think that if they just find the perfect words, or wait long enough, or show enough patience, the narcissist will eventually come around. That they'll see the light. That deep down, they must care. But the painful reality? They don't. And the more you try, the more you're drained. You're not being ignored, you're being played. Every heartfelt attempt you make is just another thread they use to entangle you further in a battle you were never meant to win. So, what's the solution? You stop playing. You recognize that no amount of kindness, logic, or emotional vulnerability will earn their respect, because their respect isn't built on connection, it's built on dominance. The only thing they respond to is what they can or cannot get away with. And as long as you're engaging, explaining, or trying to be understood, they still have leverage. This calls for a radical shift in mindset. You stop trying to make them understand you. You start accepting that they never will, and that it's not your job to make them. You stop trying to prove your worth to someone whose opinion no longer deserves that power. When you disengage from conversations that aren't rooted in truth, the entire dynamic begins to change. Narcissists thrive on your desire for resolution. Your belief that if you just love hard enough, things will change. But the moment you stop chasing their approval, their grip begins to weaken. Now, don't be surprised, this doesn't mean they'll simply walk away. Quite the opposite. When a narcissist senses they're losing control, they escalate, they insult, they provoke, they play the victim, or they make hollow promises of change. Not because they've changed, but because they're trying to re-establish control. And this is the most dangerous moment, the one where most people break. The part where you think, maybe this time it's real, maybe they mean it. But it never is. The cycle continues as long as you allow it. So the real answer isn't to argue better, wait longer, or try harder. The real answer is to stop participating. You don't need their agreement to own your truth. You don't need their permission to set your boundaries. And you don't need their validation to reclaim your perspective. Because here's the truth they don't want you to know. The moment you stop looking to them for fairness, for recognition, or for basic respect, you take back control over your own emotions, your clarity, and your reality. And that is something a narcissist cannot tolerate. They thrive in emotional chaos. One of their most powerful tools is provocation, pressing just the right buttons to trigger you, to pull you off center. Once you react, they've succeeded. Now you're emotional. Now you're off balance. Now they're in charge again. Think of it. A subtle jab in public. A comment that cuts just deep enough to sting, but not deep enough to confront. or they bring up something from years ago just to watch you squirm. Sometimes they even rewrite events entirely, forcing you to defend yourself over something that never happened. And when you take the bait when you argue, explain, or seek fairness, you're playing their game. And on their battlefield, they always win. That's why your greatest strength isn't your compassion. It isn't your logic. It isn't even your patience. It's your detachment. Not coldness, not numbness, but the ability to guard your emotional energy and invest it only where it's respected. Because when you react in real time, when you lash out, plead, or seek accountability, you're handing them fuel. You're giving them the very thing they use to keep the show going. True detachment means this: not every insult deserves a response. Not every accusation needs defense. And not every battle is worth fighting. Some conflicts are traps designed only to pull you in. And when you stop reacting, when you stop feeding their need for attention, the performance starts to collapse. Because if they can't provoke you, they can't control you. If they can't trigger you, they can't twist your words. If they can't make you react, they lose. And that's when their greatest fear begins to show. Because their power, it's not real. It's performance. Smoke and mirrors. And you've always been the audience. So when you finally walk away, the show ends. But don't be fooled. It won't end quietly. Narcissists don't surrender power. They escalate. They shift tactics. Silent treatment, guilt trips, dramatic apologies, desperate attempts to re-engage you. And it's in these moments that most people fall back into the cycle, believing once again that change might be possible. But narcissists don't change because you walked away once. They test your silence. They poke at old wounds. They craft outrageous stories just to get a reaction. And that's where we must pause and ask, how do we stay grounded when the narcissist changes their mask? If this message resonates, don't forget to hit subscribe, share your experience in the comments, or simply say amen if you've ever had to choose peace over performance. Now, let's explore the final stage where the real healing begins, and you fully reclaim the life they tried to control. In the last part, we uncovered how narcissists thrive on emotional chaos and that true strength lies in detachment. But here's what we must understand now. Detachment isn't a one-time action. It's a discipline, a mindset, a choice you make over and over, even when your emotions beg you to react. Because the moment you slide Veen, just once they see it, and they take it as a sign that they still have access to you. That if they push a little harder, twist the knife a little deeper, wear the right mask, they'll get what they want. That's why detachment isn't weakness, it's power. It means realizing that silence is not surrender, it's strength. That walking away isn't defeat, it's victory. That disengaging doesn't mean you've given up, it means you've chosen yourself. And yes, they'll notice. They may lash out. They may fall silent. They may come back with promises of change, tears, or apologies that seem heartfelt. But don't be fooled. It's not sincerity. It's strategy. Your role is to see through the performance, to remember that words mean nothing without aligned, consistent action. And when those actions are rooted in manipulation, not healing, the only reasonable response is distance. You don't owe them your energy. You don't owe them an explanation. What you owe it, you truly owe is to yourself. Peace. And peace isn't found in trying to fix a game that was never fair. It's found in stepping away from that game altogether. At the core of every narcissist's control is one powerful weapon: uncertainty. The more uncertain you are about who you are, what's true, and what you deserve, the more control they maintain. They thrive when your inner world becomes shaky, unsure, filled with self-doubt. So, to reclaim your power, you must first reclaim something far more personal: your identity. You must rediscover what you believe in, what you will and will not accept, what you know to be true about yourself regardless of what they say. Because if you don't define who you are, a narcissist will be more than happy to do it for you. And they won't do it all at once. It won't be loud or obvious. It will be subtle. A playful jab at your intelligence here. A harmless joke about your abilities there. A passing comment about your looks, your work, your value as a person. At first, it feels like nothing, but over time, it becomes everything. Slowly, these micro-attacks begin to chip away at your sense of self. Before you even realize it, you're questioning your worth. You're wondering if maybe, just maybe, they're right. Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe you do need to try harder. Maybe the problem is you. But don't be deceived. This unraveling of confidence is not random. It's not accidental. It's intentional. Because the more fragile your self-worth becomes, the easier it is for them to mold you. The more you question your instincts, the more they can rewrite reality. They bend the truth, and suddenly, their version of events becomes the dominant one. This is where narcissists rely heavily on one of their most damaging tools, gaslighting. They don't reshape the truth because they're confused. They do it because they want you to be. They want you to question your memories, doubt your judgment, feel like the ground beneath your feet is always shifting. And once your internal compass is off course, they know they've won because now you'll look to them for direction. You'll need them to validate your version of reality. And for them, that's the ultimate control. But here's what Billy Graham would remind us in moments like this. A narcissist's opinion of you only carries power if you let it. Their words only have weight if you allow them to take root in your mind, if you let their labels define you, if you let their criticisms shape your identity. And this is where so many people-kind, compassionate people fall. They keep trying to reason, to defend, to explain, to prove their worth. But the moment you seek validation from a narcissist, you've already given away your strength. You're handing over the keys to your identity and saying, "You tell me who I am." And that's all they need to win. So the answer isn't to convince them of your worth. It's to become so firmly anchored in it that they can no longer move you. That's when the shift happens. It's not about pride. It's not about revenge. It's not about outsmarting them or becoming cold. It's about clarity. Instead of constantly playing defense responding to their accusations, correcting their twisted truths, you go on the offense. Not with aggression, but with certainty. You decide, once and for all, that you alone are the final authority on your identity, that their labels no longer apply, that their projections don't belong to you, that their perception of you will no longer be your prison. You stop internalizing their words. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop trying to win at a game that was designed for you to lose. Because when you stand firmly in your truth, something incredible happens. Their lies collapse under their own weight. Let's be clear, this isn't arrogance. This isn't about becoming cold-hearted or cruel. It's not about matching their toxicity. Because the moment you step into their arena, chaos, the conflict, the emotional back and forth, you've already lost. That space was built for them, and they know how to dominate there. Narcissists thrive in instability, in confusion, in never-ending cycles of blame and half apologies. If you want to win, you don't stay in the arena. You walk out. You leave behind the need to explain yourself. You choose peace over their understanding, and you make the deepest, most unshakable decision of all, that your identity will no longer be shaped by someone else's distortion. That's where your true power lies, not in changing them, but in becoming untouchable by their chaos. And in the final part of this journey, we'll explore exactly how to protect that power, how to step fully into the life they tried to keep from you. So, if this message resonates, make sure to subscribe, leave a comment with Amen if you're reclaiming your peace, and stay with us as we bring this truth home in the next chapter. Healing begins the moment you start seeing yourself clearly, so clearly that their version of you no longer matters. Once you reclaim that inner ground, their ability to manipulate you fades. It doesn't vanish instantly, but it begins to weaken day by day, decision by decision. Of course, they'll resist. When a narcissist senses their grip loosening, they don't quietly walk away. They escalate. The insults grow sharper. The guilt trips grow heavier. The manipulation becomes more urgent, more intense, more erratic. They will press every emotional button they know. They will say whatever they must, do whatever it takes, not because they love you, but because they are panicking. You see, they're not fighting for you. They're fighting for the control they once had over you. And the moment you recognize that truth, truly understand that their desperation is not love, but fear of losing control, everything begins to shift. Their tactics begin to fall flat. Their words no longer pierce your heart. Their approval no longer defines your worth. And that terrifies them more than anything. Because when you no longer need them, they are left with nothing. The influence they once held begins to dissolve the very moment you stop responding to their made-up reality. But here's the real challenge. So many people have been conditioned to respond, conditioned to explain, to argue, to fight for fairness in a world where fairness never existed. They keep engaging, hoping that if they just say the right thing or use the right tone, the narcissist will finally understand. But they never do. And every attempt to justify, explain, or negotiate just pulls the noose tighter. That's why the most powerful move you can make is to disengage, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Detachment is not silence alone. It's a complete transformation of how you respond inside. It means retraining your thoughts to see their provocations not as truth, but as tactics. Predictable, recycled behaviors meant to pull you back into their game. And once you stop feeding the cycle, stop reacting, stop explaining, the entire system begins to collapse. Now, let's be honest. This isn't easy, especially if you've spent years or decades caught in their emotional trap. Because narcissists don't just create toxic relationships. They create psychological addiction. They train you to crave their approval, to live for those rare moments of kindness, to survive on scraps of affection between storms of cruelty. That's why that after the most brutal arguments, there's a strange relief when they suddenly turn sweet again. It's not love. It's intermittent reinforcement, a classic cycle of abuse, reward, and more abuse. And breaking free from that trap requires something bold, a radical act. It requires cutting off their supply completely, not just by leaving physically, but by evicting them from your mind. You stop waiting for the apology that will never come. You stop hoping they'll wake up one day and see the damage they've done. Because deep down, you know they won't. The real work, the hard work leads in turning inward. Because the reason their manipulation lasted so long isn't just about them. It's also about the part of you that allowed it. And yes, that's a painful truth. But it's also your most powerful opportunity for healing. It's easy to lay all the blame at their feet, to see them as the source of the dysfunction. But if you do that, you rob yourself of transformation. Because the deeper question isn't, why are they like this? The question that matters is, why did I allow this to continue? When you sit with that question honestly, without shame, you begin to uncover the roots. Maybe it's an old belief that love must be earned. Maybe it's a fear of abandonment. Maybe you were raised to believe your needs were secondary to keeping the peace. Whatever the origin, identifying it is the beginning of freedom. Because once you see the pattern, you can begin to break it. You can build new boundaries not just with others, but with yourself. You can redefine what you allow, what you expect, and what you deserve. You begin to build a life that is no longer shaped by someone else's brokenness. And here's the beautiful truth. When you truly heal, you stop attracting these toxic dynamics. Narcissists don't seek out people with firm boundaries and unwavering self-worth. They go after those who excuse bad behavior, those who doubt their perceptions before doubting the narcissist, those still searching for something outside themselves to feel whole. So the true solution, the lasting solution, is not revenge, not confrontation, not trying to prove your worth. It's becoming the kind of person who is immune to manipulation in the first place. Because when you reach that point, when you no longer need to explain yourself, or defend your choices, or convince anyone of your worth, you have already won. You have shattered the cycle. You have stepped out of the fog. You have reclaimed your voice, your clarity, your peace. And that is something no narcissist will ever be able to take from you again. If this message spoke to you, take a moment to breathe in the strength you now hold. And if you're walking this path of healing, you're not alone. Hit the subscribe button to keep learning how to protect your peace. Drop a comment with Amen if you're reclaiming your voice, ITA. And share this message with someone who needs to hear it. Because freedom begins the moment you realize you were never the problem. You were simply the one who finally said no more.